Welcome to avagmah, and a very pleasant good morning to each and every one of you, ladies and gentlemen, our dear students, our faculty, and special invitees. I request you to join me in putting your hands together to welcome our guru of this morning. He's a very distinguished educationist, corporate executive, Professor Dr. SL Rao. Please join me in welcoming him. Thank you so much, Dr. Rao, for addressing us today. I wish to dwell a little bit about our Guru Talk series. We take a lot of trouble, detailed trouble, to plan and execute this event, Guru Talk, for our students. Mainly because we believe that there is so much happening in our environment that it is important for people who are specialists in environment watching to be able to talk about it and guide us in the right direction as to how we should perceive the events that are developing around us almost every 1 hour, if I may say so. So you'll appreciate that a great deal of effort goes into the making of this event. There is a pre-event publicity, there is the post-event publicity, apart from the difficult task of finding the right person to deliver the Guru Talk. And when we do find one, like we have been fortunate today to have Professor Rao with us, we have to see that it doesn't interfere with that engagement because they're very busy people. And then, of course, there's a whole team that works all around India to support us technically and otherwise. So, a great deal of effort goes into the making of the Guru Talk event. And the technical support is not just in Bangalore, because some of our Guru Talks are held outside Bangalore, and we have our teams supporting it from wherever the Guru chooses to speak from. So we are particularly grateful to the large team that works very hard in the background, unseen, but they are there to hold our hand. And a very special thanks to our help desk, last minute registrations of students, and provide relevant technical support when required, because this is an online lecture. Having said that, let me take a few moments of your time to talk to you about our Guru, Professor SL Rao. Now, Dr. Rao is a man for all seasons. Introducing him is a bit of a challenge for me, but I'll do my best. He has been many things in his life, a very checkered and a wonderful life he's had. He graduated with a BA from the University of Bombay, which is now known as Mumbai. Then he took his MA in economics from the Delhi School of Economics. Essentially, Professor SL Rao is a man of the world. It's difficult to box him into a neat. I find that he glides with great ease and grace into each role, whether it's teaching at a premier B school, or being a management consultant, or being a statutory regulator, an advisor to the government, an author, or a board member. And he has been all this. Believe me, he has been all this. In a private conversation with Dr. Rao, which I hope you will not mind if I quote, he confesses that he enjoyed his role in management because he says he's essentially a manager at his heart. 33 years of senior positions in multinationals like Hindustan Unilever, Metu Beardsell, Warner Lambert, President, All India Management Association, Director General, National Council for Applied Economic Research, First Chairman, Central Electricity Regulatory Board, columnist, Deccan Herald, Financial Express, The Telegraph, Distinguished Emeritus Fellow at the Tata Energy Research Institute, and he has authored many books. He is on the board of IMMB, Bharatidasan University, and he is also a trustee of BIC. And all that I have mentioned so far is just a few of the many things he's done. So we are particularly privileged and honored to have you with us, Dr. Rao. Thank you so much for coming. Appropriately, because of this great experience and his enormous insight, incredible insight developed over 6 decades of work from a ringside view grows, we have requested Professor Rao to interact with us about the dawn of the Achhe Din. Now, the concept of Achhe Din has been so much in the news for the last 3-4 months. We thought we would appropriately caption Dr. Rao's topic as Great Expectations. So let me not stand between you and Professor SL Rao. I'm sure you're all very keen to hear him. Professor Rao, once again a warm welcome, and over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramani, and greetings to all the ladies and gentlemen around the country and elsewhere who are participating with me in this discussion. And I'm very grateful to Professor Ramani for all the nice things that he has said. My main focus in this presentation will be in looking at the issues of the Indian economy and where we should be going, what we could be doing, and what we should be doing to get there. I'm not going to talk about the present economic program of the Modi government because you will see as I go along that almost everything that I am saying needs to be done as a plan of action is in fact part of the economic program that Mr. Modi has talked from time to time. But there are problems in getting that program achieved, and I hope in the discussion we will get to that. So let me start without any further ado in looking at the things that I'm going to be doing. You have before you the overview slide which tells you what I'm going to be talking about as I go along. Let me start with the first topic, which is to review the macroeconomy of India, which if I can summarize it in a phrase, it is growth with inflation. We've had growth in the past decade, in the last 10 years, particularly in the 90s, due to removing of licensing, import licensing, industrial licensing, a great deal of public spending on infrastructure, and a great deal of social welfare in the guise of charity. There was a rush of foreign institutional investment. There were rising private investment, and yet industry and agriculture were far behind the service sector in the GDP. It's a very peculiar thing that a poor country like this, with so many millions living below the poverty line, still has a situation where services dominate the economy, not manufacturing, and agriculture is declining. In 2008, we had the global financial crisis. India reacted by significant stimulus spending, as they say, and that stimulus spending really did a lot to revive the economy. Foreign banks in India withdrew funds from the Indian economy, and if it had not been for the fact that we had good reserves, we would have been in serious trouble. There was a boom, also partly helped by the fact that we kept our oil prices in India low, petrol, diesel, kerosene, and so forth. And these were as subsidies, and they were given by the government. And therefore, the government deficits kept going up. They wrote off loans to farmers. Mr. Manmohan Singh, almost the first thing he did was to write off. And the result of all this has been that we have had a rising current account deficit in the balance of payments. We've had a huge fiscal deficit, as high as it was when the crisis came in 1991. Collapsing exports, partly because also of the iron ore scam that took place primarily in this state, also in Goa. The rupee exchange value fell down. In 1 year, the rupee went from 42 rupees to the dollar to 65. And you can imagine what damage it did to many companies. We also had double-digit inflation, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, which adversely affected savings and investment. So we've had a situation to seriously worry about. Let's look, therefore, at the investment situation. India has had a very high savings rate, but investment was made in infrastructure and other projects. They were stuck due to delays in government approvals. India is supposed to be one of the slowest countries as far as government approvals and implementation is concerned. Consequently, since most of the money for this infrastructure investment came to the banks, and these are nationalized banks are sitting on something like 300,000 crores worth of what are called stressed assets, because infrastructure investments are not moving, because of land, because of rehabilitation of tribals, because of environment and forest clearance, and so forth. All this has to change. The declining growth in industrial production and employment and some agricultural product diversification did help a bit, particularly the agricultural product diversification, because the Indian consumer, even the poorest consumer, was moving away from eating cereals to increasingly eating fruits and vegetables and eggs and meat and so forth. And the result of that was that the prices of those products have gone up very sharply. As you all know, vegetable prices are at their peak and have been going up for the last few years. At the same time, inequalities widened. The rich became much richer. A great part of the Indian assets are held by the very rich, a few very rich. But poverty did decline. People's nutritional values did improve somewhat. Not enough, but it did improve. And there was a labor shortage because the social welfare schemes of government, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which assured employment to one member of the household per family and gave them a certain amount, going up 100 to 160, going up from 100 to 160 rupees a day. That resulted in a lot of migrant labor from Bihar, Orissa, and other states that would go into work, for example, in Tamil Nadu agriculture or in Ludhiana small-scale industries. That labor began to decline, and there was a labor shortage. It's strange that in a country which is overpopulated as we are, that we should also have a labor shortage of this kind. And one has to ask whether schemes of this kind are the correct kind of things for us to do. The urban environment was heavily polluted, and that also was because of the number of people who are migrating into urban areas. India's urbanization growth has been quite tremendous. It is expected that by 2030, we'll have something like 30% of the population. By 2050, half of India will be urban. Let's look at infrastructure. As far as infrastructure is concerned, delays and weak contracts were part of the problem which created the delay, the kind of slowness in growth of infrastructure. I've already mentioned them: environment, forests, rehabilitation of tribals, etc. And also the rehabilitation of people who are displaced as large amounts of land got taken away. And you have seen what happened in Bengal, for example, where it became a political issue, where the Tatas are going to set up a huge motor car factory, and they were told to, even though the land had been acquired for them, they were not allowed to move, and they were then given land very quickly in Gujarat. And Gujarat has a car factory and employment which should have actually been in Bengal, which badly needs that kind of investment. Similarly, in road and metro projects, we had the private sector entering. Again here, the contracts were poorly drafted. There was a 25-year average tariff that had to be quoted, and that became a problem because that required very good skills in forecasting what the road traffic would be, and you can never do that very correctly. And 25, 30 years is a long period of time, and many of the road projects that went to the private sector have got into trouble. Some of them are backed out of it. Railway delays also happened because of railways delayed clearances on overbridges and underbridges, and that again delayed road construction. Many of the private parties also going in for the first time into investments like this bid very aggressively for these projects at very low contract prices. And when they started implementing, they found it was not viable, and some of them have gone off this. Similarly, coal, in the case of power and in the case of fertilizer. You all know what has been happening on coal. The Supreme Court has now cancelled most of the licenses given by the last government and before for coal. And unless we do very quickly something about this, we are already importing vast quantities of coal, more than 100 million tons, when we are the third or fourth largest coal reserves in the world. There is no reason for us to be importing, but There are environmental problems. There are forest problems. Many of these coal mines are in dense jungle. You have to make a choice between development and environment. And some laws of forest land is inevitable. What we can do is to reforest and ensure that that is done and plant the trees and so forth. But some choice has to be made. Government until now has not been willing to make the choice. Therefore, it has been a problem. Similarly, gas. We found vast quantities of gas, for example, in the Andhra region after the Bombay High, and you know what has happened to that gas. The amount of gas that's been available has been declining. So clearly, again, the way in which we have gone about drafting contracts in terms of allocating natural resources raises serious questions, and that has to be corrected. Uranium. We've had a serious problem with uranium. We don't have enough uranium in this country. We have thorium, but we still have to move to the thorium-based nuclear plants. Uranium we were not able to get because after we exploded the atom bomb, we were blacklisted by the uranium suppliers in the world. Now, with Manmohan Singh's agreement with the Americans, the uranium supplies have improved, and at least we are now utilizing the 5,000 megawatts or so of uranium nuclear capacity that we have got in India. So, all in all, we've had a serious problem created by government, created also by regulators. We have regulators for power, we have regulators for telecom and so forth, petroleum pipelines, but these regulators also have not acted very well. Many of them are retired bureaucrats. They don't really understand what needs to be done. They don't understand the financial, legal, technical and other aspects of regulation, and one result of this is that they have not given the tariffs that you need as the costs have gone up. Let's move on to rail, roads, air and water. In railways, we've had extremely poor governance for a very long time. Passenger fares were heavily subsidized, grossly uneconomic, and this is not something that is viable. We needed an independent regulatory body to set railway tariffs, forgetting about who protests, who does not protest. You have to make it viable. This is a huge business, huge investment, and we haven't done that. We've had poor investment in safety, poor investment in modernization, and in new projects in the railways because they haven't had money. They're not generating the resources. Remember, these are all huge investments. When you have a huge investment, you need to generate the cash to be able to reinvest and to build new capacity. If you don't do it, you can't do either. And in many of our infrastructure sectors, we have not done it because of the populism of our pricing. We've tried to keep the prices low to the consumer. In the process, we have not only increased the deficit of the government, added to inflation, but we've also had very, very poor implementation. Airports is one area where there has been a lot of development, and you can see, if you fly as I do around the country, the difference between airports, terminals created by the private sector in Delhi or in Hyderabad or in Bangalore or in Bombay versus the air terminals created by the public sector. For example, the new one in Pune, the new one in Calcutta, the new one in Madras, all pretty awfully designed. They don't even have a central X-ray machine where all the bags can just go through. They still go the old-fashioned way. So we need airport investment in a very big way, but airport investment has meant costs. And all of us pay a lot more for utilizing airports than we ever did before. But that is an inevitable price you pay if you want a well-run, decent air terminal. There has been poor, inadequate metering in the case of water, and water tariffs are very low. They are not enough to even repair the water pipelines, let alone lay new ones. So, borewells. We've had huge loss of groundwater levels in the cities in India because of the, tremendous amount of borewell digging that has taken place. We need to have some way of regulating that. Let's look at other industries. As far as other industries are concerned, one very, very important thing to remember is that we have paid very little attention to the growth of medium and small scale industries and cottage industries. When we talk about manufacturing as being important for the economy, that's for two reasons. One, because manufacturing gives you highly technically advanced products. It helps your export. It should help your export like it has done for China. Second, manufacturing should produce employment. But organized manufacturing does not produce employment. Where the employment comes is medium, small scale and cottage. Our cottage industries that produce wonderful handicrafts, and stuff like that. Now, those must be encouraged. They must be stimulated. They must be helped with quality materials. They must be helped with funding. They must be helped with marketing. None of that has really happened in any big way. When we talk about manufacturing, we keep talking about large-scale manufacturing, and we keep forgetting the hundreds of thousands of people who will be employed in medium, small scale and cottage industries, and that's been ignored. Similarly, inflation and job uncertainties, static employment, all these have affected demand and therefore affected the growth of organized large-scale manufacturing. High interest rates have been a serious problem. Capital has become expensive, and that again makes many of our industries quite uncompetitive. 2 years of declining rupee value has again made imported materials for manufacturing and of machinery quite expensive. Our defense and nuclear energy are not open to private manufacture. India has just been open under this government. Even foreign investment is not there. Even now, what the Modi government has done is to go up to 49%, and you're not going to get people bringing in vast investments and technology and not have management control, which they must have which they won't have if it's only 49% and not at least 51% of their equity in that investment. So we've had another problem here, that there has been an enormous emphasis in organized manufacturing on employing casual labor, contract labor, and because they are cheaper, because you can sack them more easily, and the labor laws have been therefore a major problem as far as organized manufacturing is concerned. Let's look at agriculture very quickly. Agriculture policies in agriculture have remained unchanged for a long time. There has been very poor coordination between all the inputs required for agriculture, and we've had quite a problem as far as agriculture is concerned. There has been, let me try and explain to you what has been happening in agriculture. We give support prices to the farmer in order to ensure that he gets a minimum price. And we also have a procurement program where government procures at those minimum support prices. We then have the ration supply to the consumer, particularly in urban areas. What has happened is that because of politics, these minimum support prices have been going up, and therefore the cost of procurement has gone up. And yet the ration grains have remained more or less static in price, again adding to government deficit. Also, remember that I told you earlier, the Indian consumer is moving away from grains into other things, and we are therefore procuring vast quantities of grain for which government has little storage capacity available. Storage is done in the open, and a lot of these, more than 50 million tons, rotted last year because of that kind of storage. So we have people who need more grain, and the grain is rotting, and we are procuring and producing more and more grain because of wrong pricing support policies. There has been poor development of agricultural infrastructure. If you are going to grow more vegetables and fruits as the market requires, you need a lot of help in terms of seeds, you need a lot of help in agricultural practices, you need a lot of help in terms of cold stores, so that the fruits and vegetables can be stored, so that out of season they are still available at a reasonable price. We don't have that. We don't have enough investment that is going on in that. Again, we need to deal with that. Many governments in India, Tamil Nadu, Punjab, and our state of Karnataka, give away free power to agriculture. The idea being that the poor farmer will therefore be able to draw water. Good idea, but very, very poor implementation. Because who takes the free power? The person who has at least one pump set, usually many more than one. The fellow who owns the pump set is not the poorest farmer in the village. He is the richer farmer. The millions of poor farmers don't benefit. What happens is that these farmers getting free power are using that free power to draw more and more water, because water is there for free. And that water is used to grow water intensive crops. For example, in Punjab, we have grown a lot of paddy. Punjab became the paddy supplier for much of the country. But paddy in India is grown by flooding the land. And that flooding of the land has led to salinity. So many parts of India, because of this free water that's available through free power, you had salinity that has been developing. And I told you at the beginning that we've had so many policies, each of these make things worse instead of trying to understand what really needs to be done. The other part is the farmer loan write-off. I told you Manmohan Singh wrote off 72,000 crores of farmer loans when he became Prime Minister. If that 72,000 crores had been invested in creating agricultural assets, cold stores, roads, canals, small storage dams, we would have had a long-term better future for agriculture. What we have done is written it off, and that's forgotten in that year. Take foreign investment. India has had a very curious kind of attitude to foreign investment. We've had overall a declining investment overall in the GDP. Our foreign institutional investment, which is people putting money into shares and stocks and so on, that has been going up very sharply. There's been plenty of that. Not much of direct investment. That is, people bring in money to dig holes in the ground, build factories, and make those factories produce in India. There is not as much of that as there's been of buying shares. Now, in some ways, not a bad thing, because it does mean that Indians can then start companies with foreign money. But bad in the sense, not too much of it is coming in there, much of it is going in just to speculate in the stock market. And if you look at the stock market, what you find is that the Indian stock market is a pretty volatile stock market. If you look at the last many years, prices go up sharply, prices come down very sharply. Why do they do that? Not because the Indian investor is going in to buy and then selling. It is the foreign investor who is trying to make an opportunity. He comes into the Indian stock market, buys shares, and gets out. He's made profit. And even more important, a lot of Indians today are sending money out of India through the Hawala route. The politicians, the bureaucrats, the businessmen, that money goes off into countries like Mauritius, with which we have an agreement that any investment that comes from Mauritius into India is free of capital gains tax. In India, you pay long-term and short-term capital gains tax of 10 and 20%. In Mauritius, you have zero. So the Indian who sends Hawala money into Mauritius and invests it in the stock market in India is home and dry. He's laundered his money. It's now smelling nice and clean because it is not it's not paid capital gains tax. He's made profit. He's taken the money back. It comes in therefore as foreign investment. And that is something that we need to control. Governments haven't done it. I don't know if this government is going to do it. Similarly, commissions on overseas purchases, particularly defense, where there's been a huge amount of overseas accumulation of commissions and payment of black money and accumulation of funds overseas. You know, the International Monetary Fund has estimated that Indians have the largest holdings of currencies abroad of any other nationality in the world. They have very unclear, uncomplicated tax policies. The best example is the foolish thing we have done with Vodafone, where Vodafone bought up the shares of Hutchison, a Chinese company. That Chinese company had bought the shares of SR, which is an Indian company. So when those shares were bought, there was a capital gain for Hutchison from Vodafone. So in the Indian law, Hutchison should have paid a capital gains tax in India. But Hutchison was not in India, it is in China, it doesn't operate in India. So what happens? Government of India went after Vodafone to pay a couple of $1 billion in tax. And when it was contested and the Supreme Court finally said, no, they're not liable, the finance minister then passed a law retrospectively charging tax on these things. And Vodafone is now faced with retrospective taxation of $2 billion. Then the foreign investor is saying, how can I come into this country where the laws are not firm, where you can suddenly change the law and make it retrospective? I didn't even know there was such a law, and you have made that law effective on me. And that again affects investment. Defense, of course, is an important source. We have cumbersome and time-consuming procedures in defense as well. Let's look at private investment in terms of the capital availability, in terms of infrastructure. Except for large businesses, just keep me advised of the time. Except for large businesses, there is little access to foreign capital markets for Indian companies. Inflation, liquidity squeezes from time to time, high interest rates have all affected private investment in India. The foreign exchange rupee variations I mentioned to you, which again makes it very difficult to borrow abroad, because if the rupee was 40 to the dollar and became 60 within a year, the balance sheet of the company gets badly affected, because you are supposed to value all your foreign holdings and borrowings at the current exchange rate. And the current exchange rate makes the rupee much less valuable, but a lot more. You borrowed $1, that now is 40, that became 60. So your debts have gone up a great deal, and that has affected many companies very badly. I hope this is clear. If there's a problem, you can ask me afterwards. The contracts for public-private participation projects are for excessively long periods. They allow very high debt, and they also make costs rises in costs difficult to recover. There is a need for more urban centers with more roads, sanitation, water supply, power, and housing. And that is something that we need badly, because there is going to be increasing migration from rural to urban areas. For that, you need to make the urban living a little bit more comfortable than it is. Let's look at the demographics. All of you have heard of the demographic dividend. What is the demographic dividend? The demographic dividend is basically that India has the largest proportion of people below the age of 35 and even 25, and it will be more. It will be the largest in the world. This gives a large youthful population, which can be a large working population, adding to the production of the country and adding to the country's prosperity. That is the imperative, therefore, of finding employment for them. How do you find employment for them? You can't find employment for them if they're illiterate. You can't find good employment. You can't find good employment for them if they don't have skills. So you need huge investment in education and in skills. The number of universities will have to go up 10 times. The number of skills development centers will have to many-fold increase the ITIs. At the same time, what we are now doing on this online is another major way in which we can add to education, because we don't have enough faculty, we don't have enough universities, we don't have enough skills development centers. Online education can help a lot. But all this calls for thinking and for investment. The galloping urbanization is going to happen, and in fact, we need to reduce the pressure of population agriculture, and we need more people moving, therefore, into the cities. This makes industrialization imperative. It means requiring building of more cities and towns, improving the present cities, and providing adequate facilities in existing ones. Let's look at another aspect of demographics. That's health and welfare. Now, investment in health services in India is quite inadequate. Government spends a lot less than the private investor. Private family spends a lot, particularly poor families, spend a lot more of their income on health than the rich families, and overall much more proportion than government does. We need to make medical treatment affordable. We need to make medicines affordable. We need drug price control, which keeps prices low and yet keeps the profit profitable for the pharmaceutical companies. And here there is some ambivalence in government from time to time. We have a rising life expectancy. We have not only the youngest population, we're also getting an increasing number of aged people. The number of people about the age of 60 has gone up very sharply. The senior citizens have to be looked after. When I was a young man, I was able to support my parents. As I grow old, I can't expect my son, who is also an elderly man, to support me. And therefore, it is the job of government and the job of my savings and the investment I make from the savings to be able to support me in old age. And this has to be thought through. Not enough thought is going into it, though recently we now had the National Pension Scheme, which is a universal scheme. The care of women is another major imperative in India, both in terms of education and proper facilities, and particularly healthcare. And what you have got, with this message that the Nobel Peace Prize has given to the Indian and the Pakistani woman, is that education is important. Education for the poor is extremely important. Children must go to school and to college, and women must leave the home and be encouraged to study. They are trying it, but needs a lot more investment that is happening. Another aspect of the whole governance issue in India is that of accountability and administration. This is something every thinker talking about India. India is very good at ideas. All Indians can give you 100 different solutions to all the problems. What we are very poor at is how do you implement these ideas, and that requires very good administration. We've had administrative reforms commissions, police commissions, which have made excellent reports on what needs to be done, but nothing has been really sufficiently implemented, and we really have a serious problem. Let's take this one by one. Our administrative officers are not individually accountable. If something goes wrong, the secretary in the ministry will not say, I did it. He will say, there are 20 others who are with me who did it. Other ministries were involved, so he can't punish me because something went wrong. Therefore, we need to find a way in which, as we do in the management community in companies, where you have job descriptions, you have clearly laid down outcomes from each individual person working in the company. Similarly, in government, we need to establish outcomes, and we need to measure outcomes and reward outcomes. This is something that is beginning to happen with this new government in Delhi. Then again, we do not have a penalty on ministries because they have delayed clearances. Let me give you an example. I was talking to you earlier about infrastructure, how the delays in government decisions on environment clearance, forest clearance, land clearances have delayed projects. Now we are talking about projects costing thousands of crores. That means a lot of money is locked up. That money has got to pay interest. And therefore the entrepreneur is really at a loss because of government delays. Surely the person who caused the delay, if the government has said, I'll give you a clearance in 6 months and takes 2 years to do it or 10 years to do it, then government should pay the cost for it. There is no such penalty today on ministries for delay. And I hope something like that can be brought in if you're going to get better administration and accountability. Now, again, when state governments are customers, it becomes very difficult to renegotiate tariffs. Let me give you an example again. One of the brilliant ideas, 2,000 megawatts, huge big plants, either based in coal mines with coal being given to this power plant or based on imported coal. There were 2 imported coal plants, one at Mundra in Gujarat, the other at is in Andhra on the near. And Indonesian government suddenly said that if you sell coal from outside to outside Indonesia, you'll have to pay a certain minimum price. That minimum price was far higher than the price that was taken into account by the electricity regulators in Andhra and in Gujarat in setting power tariffs. Therefore, when the coal prices went up like that, the projects became unviable. The companies followed different strategies. Reliance stopped constructing their factory in Andhra after having spent 1,000 crores. The total cost is going to be 20,000 crores. They said until this is resolved and government and the regulator tell us that our higher coal prices can be passed on through tariffs, higher tariffs on power, we are not going to complete the plant. As far as the Gujarat is concerned, the Tatas actually went full steam ahead and built the plant, and they started producing power. Each unit of power that they produced was being sold at a loss. If you look at Tata Power share prices, the result on the whole company are visible. Now, which is a good thing. You can't allow either of these things to happen. Either don't build the plant or make the company lose so much money that it gets into serious trouble. What you need is to be able to renegotiate contracts. And renegotiating contracts, of course, creates other problems. There is, in law, something called the sanctity of contracts. People enter into a contract because they think the contract will be followed religiously, that it will not be broken. But if it is going to be broken, then I have a problem. And therefore, the government has to think, and the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission did think about it. They came out with a proposal for renegotiating rates. The state governments that had signed the purchasing power agreements with these Mundra people said no, we are not going to pay, and is now ended up in court. So you have a situation where poor Tatas haven't got the tariffs that they should get, and the state government is not paying therefore the higher tariffs. The whole situation will get dragged on in the courts until it is settled. Hence, there is a need to make contracts much more clear and much more viable. The other part of industry in India, which is a very sad story, is the story of state ownership and control. At the time of independence, India had very little industry. and very little infrastructure. Any investment in power plants, any investment in new roads, more railways had to come, requires money. And new factories, steel and copper and all that, private sector didn't have the money. So at that time in 1946, there was a thing called the Bombay Plan, which was chaired by G.D. Birla and J.R.D. Tata. The industrialists said government should invest. And Panditji accepted that, and because government could raise the money, which the individual private company could not. So the money was raised, government companies were set up like SAIL, Steel Authority, Hindustan Steel, Bharat Heavy Electricals, and so on. Number of essential industries were set up by government. By the 60s, the private sector had become much more prosperous, it could raise money. What we should have done at that time was to have called a halt to any more state-owned industries, even perhaps go back on state ownership and let the private sector create and run industries and regulate them carefully to make sure that they don't profiteer, that they don't misuse their position. But Mrs. Indira Gandhi went full steam ahead. She went further with more state ownership of industry. She nationalized banks. She nationalized insurance companies. India became largely a state-owned economy. And in that, and the industrial licensing controlled the private sector. Government controlled everything. In 91, we got out of this industrial licensing. That has released a lot of entrepreneurial ability in India. It has given us very high rates of growth. But the state ownership continues. And some of the most inefficient companies in the country are state-owned. Coal India, extremely inefficient company, very poor in supplies of coal, is not able to meet its contracts. And there are others like this. Telecom is a good example. Both BSNL and MTNL are now in trouble. And HMT, major iconic company, closing down. So state ownership has not been a good thing. In any case, it is not the job of the administrator to run a company, to manage a company. Management is a very different skill altogether from administration. And we should not be having IAS officers running electricity distribution and various other state-owned companies. We should have professionals, we should have career people, and they should be left alone to do it. Government is not willing to do either. Neither will it appoint career professionals, nor will it give up control. It keeps interfering. The result is the kind of losses that we're making and the kind of inefficiencies. Some people have estimated that the loss to the GDP in India is between 1.5% to 2% because of the state ownership of industry. I'm not suggesting, remember, that private sector by itself is all right. All that I'm saying is that private ownership with very tough regulation is what we need. The inefficiencies of the state sector are a burden on the economy. And when there are losses, they're also a burden on the budget of the government and creates a deficit. And as I said, bureaucrats as managers have to be replaced by professionals. I talked about regulation. Regulation is part of governance. And you need independent regulation in order to have good governance. Independent regulation in India is there in the center and the states. We have created independent regulators in electricity. There are 25 state regulators. There is a Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. We have created a regulator for telecom, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. We have created a Petroleum and Natural Gas Advisory Board that does not look at production. It looks only at the establishment of pipelines and the pricing, but it is there. They're talking about setting up one for coal, they got one for airports and so on. My problem with independent regulation in India, having been independent regulator myself, is that what government has done is to appoint only retired bureaucrats to head these regulatory bodies. And that I think is wrong. We need independent regulation which is courageous, which is independent, which is transparent, and therefore effective, which is not easily bossed by the politician and the serving bureaucrat. We need that to change. And if we don't change that, we're going to have the kind of regulators we have today who lack independence, who lack initiative, who lack courage, who are compliant to government desires, especially with the state governments. And ministries continue to give directions to the sector that is regulated. They must be insulated from government. I've talked fairly widely and ranged over a whole lot of issues. Let me now go to the end of this. What do I think needs to be done? We need to deal with, for example, subsidies. We need to identify who should be beneficiaries. I'm not saying that in a poor country, charity is not important. Government charity is important, but not the way government charity is done today. It is not properly monitored, not evaluated. They don't know who are the beneficiaries. So we need to identify clearly who should get it. Secondly, when we give charity in India, we give it, let's say, distribute the grain. So you procure millions of tons of food grains, you pack it, you transport it thousands of miles, you find godowns to store it, you then give ration cards, you then distribute it to retailers. Now this whole thing is not only expensive, it has a huge amount of corruption and misuse. Similarly in electricity, if the poor have to get cheap electricity, they are given cheap electricity at the cost of the richer customers and the big companies who have to pay extra. This is what is called a cross subsidy. Again, what I'm suggesting is that if you want as a government to subsidize beneficiaries, then please, for heaven's sake, don't expect the supplier of the service or the good to do it. Do it directly in cash. Transfer the cash to the individual beneficiary. Keep the company separate from all these charitable acts that the government wants to perform. You're mixing things up. It has caused enormous problems all over the country, and I won't go into more detail on that. Surveys show that social expenditures are not reaching beneficiaries. For example, we have been giving cheap kerosene to the poor for a long time in India. I've done studies that show that more than 40% of the cheap kerosene is used for subsidizing diesel, which goes to adulterate diesel, which goes into lorries. So how is it benefiting the poor? It is not benefiting the poor. All that it is doing is that it is going in, it is being misused. And that applies to almost, you take food grains. A lot of the food grains that we give are in fact going out into the market. They're not reaching the poor. We need, therefore, to get away from that kind of subsidies. And particularly when it comes to imported items. Oil and gas is a major import for India. To subsidize costs of petrol, costs of diesel, costs of kerosene is ridiculous, because all that you're doing is to pay foreigners hard-earned Indian money in order to subsidize the poor. I think this is ridiculous. We should not do it. We should charge the correct price. Fortunately, it looks as if we are going in that direction now. We should stop all subsidies, as I said, and we should get into a massive program of direct cash transfers. We should abolish cross subsidies, and we should abolish all subsidies unless they're directly paid to beneficiaries who are identified by the government. Take assets, contracts, and auctions. All of you must have read in the newspapers about these coal auctions, telecom spectrum, and hundreds of thousands of crores that are being lost. Because of the bad way, wrong ways in which government has been giving up these ownerships, giving leases on government-owned coal mines, government-owned telecom spectrum, and so forth. We need to review all this. Start with agricultural price support. We need to review our agricultural price support program and marketing to reduce accumulation of unwanted grains. I won't go into that. I've discussed it in detail earlier. Our rural employment guarantee scheme, which is a good scheme for the poor to earn something, should not be just charity, should be for building agricultural assets, building godowns, building canals, and so on. And that is something that has not happened yet. We need to redraft all our public-private public-private contracts to ensure that there are tariff reviews and on-time project completion is ensured. We need contracts to specify government's liability for a delay in approval by government. We need to denationalize coal. We need to auction coal mines. We need to create independent regulators for coal. We need to penalize when coal is used for non-specified purposes. We need to penalize licensees for delays in coal mining. And I think that deals with the issues that I had raised earlier. We need to penalize for non-delivery or delayed delivery of contracted coal and gas. Huge problem for hundreds of thousands of crores of investment in power and fertilizer, where gas is not being delivered, where power is not being delivered, even though it was supposed to have come. And I think they should be punished for that kind of delay. We need to create a single regulator for all transport, road, rail, air, inland water transport. And similarly in the case of power. We need to combine all transport and energy, all transport, as I said, all energy, that's power, renewable energy, atomic energy, all the energy areas, coal, should be combined into one ministry and into one regulator in order to ensure coordination between different forms of transportation, different forms of power, and other forms of energy. We need to close the Mauritius route that I mentioned to you in some detail earlier. We need to stop what is called participatory notes, where somebody in Singapore can ask the bank, an Indian in Singapore can ask the bank to invest $1 million in India without disclosing who is the investor. So it's come anonymously in the name of the bank. That should not be allowed, because that's another way in which black money is created and overseas funds are created. We need to stop that too. We need to control unapproved bank holdings. I've talked about this before. It's not impossible, but the involvement of politicians, bureaucrats, apart from businessmen, in holding these holdings is important. We need to find some way to deal with them, and we need to treat these as serious criminal offenses. We need to open all sectors, every sector, whether it is defense, nuclear, whatever, to private investment, subject to independent regulation. In case of retail, we should put a limit on imports of consumer products made in India, particularly from China and elsewhere. For example, did you know that China is now selling Banarsi saris in India, made on power looms in China? It's ridiculous. Banarsi sari is an Indian monopoly. Now let's go on to something else. I talked about defense industry should be opened so that you can stop this huge amount of money that's given off as commission to overseas Indians who are acting as commission agents. We need, with state-owned enterprises, to begin a program to introduce professional management at all levels, and we need, as we go along, to begin to privatize, if not just disinvest, the government holdings and distance government from the actual management of these public enterprises. Health, education, urban facilities must expand substantially for the young women and for seniors, which deals with transfers of officers. We should make tenures longer. It's ridiculous that a secretary to government is there only for 2 years. It should be there for 4 or 5 years. Similarly, the chairman of a public sector company is chairing for 5 years. Again, that's ridiculous. Huge big company of 30,000-40,000 crore turnover. You come in as chairman, it takes you time to learn the job, it takes you time to introduce change, and then you're out. Again, that's not desirable. We need to enable officers to work in the private sector from government, and similarly private officers should be taken into government. So there is a kind of a marriage of means, methods from the private sector into the public sector. We need to make individual accountability a rule for all government staff. We need to put time limits for all government actions and make individual officers accountable. We need to introduce well-designed auction programs for natural resources. Then, when it comes to security, economic development and a law-abiding society where violations are speedily investigated are punished. Singapore is a great example. You pay the ministers huge salaries, you also punish them severely if they misbehave. We need a well-managed macroeconomy, low deficits, low inflation, etc. We need a strong defense capability. We need to invest in defense. We have not been doing that properly. And the defense commission agents have also prevented that from happening. We need a surging industrial investment. And for that, I've already mentioned the kinds of things we need to do. We need to invest in urban infrastructure. We need a travel policy in order to make the tribals feel a little bit more proud of themselves and not inferior. In defense, we need also we need a separation of powers, which has left the defense forces with little power to ensure adequacy of equipment. The defense bureaucracy is the final authority, and I think that creates a problem. Our acquisition of arms and ammunition and equipment has been so slow, so weak, that it left us in a very poor defense situation. Our defense chiefs must be the key to strategic development, not some civilian. They should participate, but the defense fellows should be very much part of that. We need a single defense chief. This thing has been going on for years, and we are still not appointed a single defense chief. Our status of defense officers. Today, even a general is inferior to a secretary in the government. We need to find some way of making parity, because government in India works in hierarchy. We need to make sure that the defense hierarchy has similar status. We need similarly defense production to be localized. End of my talk. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, on your behalf and on the behalf of the institution, you will all agree with me that we have heard a fascinating and an incredible presentation from Dr. Rao. I don't have to say more on this. You just have to see your logins, and we have had more than 105 people logging in for this session, which speaks for the great interest his talk has generated. Professor Rao, thank you so much. I now request a small question and answer session, because Dr. Rao has kindly agreed to answer any questions for about 10 to 15 minutes. He has to leave around that time because he has a prior commitment. So keep your questions very brief and to the point. One question at a time, please. Go right ahead. I would like to be permitted to ask Dr. Rao the first question, and my question is like this. Dr. Rao, thank you so much for a very fair and I think a very candid review of the past without holding undue promises for the future. My question is that if Achay Din have to dawn soon, there must be an environment of peace and tranquility around our region. Although China and India are getting closer together, do you think this peace will happen to facilitate the great expectations that we in India are hoping?
Whatever Chinese might say, they want to improve their country and to improve their economy and the conditions that people. So is the case with Pakistan, and the civilian administration does things, sometimes makes it unlikely. We still will not allow bullying to take place. And I think that balance has to be struck, that we perform the tasks that we have taken up to the best of our ability as efficient, prevent any bribery, corruption, paying of under-table money, trying to avoid as government, but it is also the individual and the private company. Good question on what should be done to improve. Fiscal deficit must come down, which means many of the expenditures that I've talked about will need to, money is going into coal imports, when we can make it ourselves. And I've already talked about that. I've talked about the privatization and the country. That we are not looking at the government as being the answer to everything, that the state is the only one that knows it all, that profit is a bad word. We need private. Profit is a bad word. Did a project called Law and Regulation in a Globalizing Economy. And action requires implementation by teams, by people. And one of the problems I see in the Modi government is that he hasn't got the people. He hasn't got the ministers, he hasn't got the political people, he hasn't got his trusted experts, and he needs to move much faster on that. I thought I'd discuss cross subsidies in some detail. How is cross subsidy harmful? Let me take an example. I'm producing, let us say, soap. You tell me to sell soap to. You're doing something which is feeding back. You tell me to sell soap at a lower price to 1,000,000 people, and you say that my other 10 million customers can pay that price, extra price. Let's say those million people are now costing me 10 crores of rupees. Therefore, cost might go up. My 10 million customers might fall because somebody else might take away my market and make more than what I'm supposed to make. This is not my job. I'm not running the soap company in order to keep accounts, in order to help the poor. I'm running a soap company to make good soap and to see that people like my soap and pay for it, and that I make money in the result. So cross subsidies are tremendously harmful because they destroy initiative, they destroy enterprise, they destroy a free market, a competitive market. I think here Mr. Modi seems to have gone about it from the word go in a very strong and aggressive fashion. He started with the SAARC prime ministers coming in. He had immediately thereafter the Chinese president coming in. He went to Japan. He went to Bhutan. He's going to Nepal. There is a flurry of activity. There are many foreign prime minister of Britain had come. There's a flurry of activity. Almost every major secretary of state in the US government has come into India after Mr. Modi became prime minister. Modi has had very, very good meetings with the President of the United States. His reception, his ability to put together the Indian community in America into a very, very strong lobby for India has been a tremendous success. That Madison Square Garden thing was I'm sure every American politician must have noted the power of India because of its ability to mass together the Indian community in America. So I think he started well, and I expect that his focus will be much more on Asia than it will be on America and Europe. That as far as the Middle East is concerned, he's going to make even more friendly gestures to Israel than the Manmohan Singh government, which also was very friendly with Israel. And as far as the Middle Eastern countries are concerned, I think he will not go out of his way to pander to their needs. And I think this is something that we will see. It also fits in with RSS philosophy of not being very pro-Muslim. So I think we can see a lot of things being done and successfully to improve international relations and accept India as a power to be reckoned with. Is it true that currency determines country's economic strength? To an extent, yes. If America, despite its weak economy, despite its inability to handle the crisis in the world of the last 10 years, whether it's in Iraq or in Afghanistan or elsewhere, it's the rise of China in relation to America, all these have shown a decline in American power. But the dollar remains the one reserve currency in the world. Everybody, the Chinese hold something like $2 to $3 trillion, and the Chinese cannot afford to have a collapse of the United States. So having a strong currency is useful. We need to do something about that ourselves. How to combat chit fund companies? Well, you need a much stronger set of regulations. You need SEBI to monitor and regulate every single investment company that comes up. You need the Reserve Bank to set out rules. Unfortunately, chit funds will always prosper because there is greed, human greed. A poor person who has saved 1,000 rupees wants that 1,000 rupees to grow faster. So if somebody offers a 50% return against a normal bank return of 9%, he or she will go and put it there and probably lose most of it or all of it. So I think we need a lot more education, that don't go for these schemes that offer you all kinds of fancy returns. Go for steady returns.
Ladies and gentlemen, on your behalf, I thank Dr. SL Rao for a very scintillating question and answer session. Thank you so much for being with us on this Sunday and making this event successful. I just wish to remind you, dear students, that the next Guru talk is scheduled on the 16th of November. It's a Sunday, and I'm happy to also inform you that Charu Sharma, the iconic sports commentator of India, will be our Guru in that event, and he's going to talk to us about the lessons cricket has taught him. So I wish you all a wonderful Sunday And once again, thank you for joining us. Once again, Dr. Rao, thank you very much for being with us. Good day and goodbye.